news, current affairs, facts and opinion. Their future in our hands. Markets, globalist technocrats versus the people. A line in the sand. The McIntyre Report.
McIntyre reporting live for Australian National Review. Behind me in the beautiful city of Shanghai, China. If you haven't been here before, you should check it out. It's a beautiful sight. I think a little over 30 years ago, that was nothing what you see today. It was also, once they did start to build it in the 90s, that was also a ghost city, one of China's first ghost cities. But of course, build it and they will come certainly turned out to be true. But China is a great example, even though in the West there's a lot of propaganda anti-China. This is what you get though when a country doesn't drop bombs but builds infrastructure, creates not destroys. And I think this is a valuable lesson for those in the West that think they're superior or morally above other parts of the world. When this political system, whether you agree with it or not, delivers, it creates not destroys. They build roads, bridges, not just in China and cities, but they do it around the world. Where in the West, what is the West accomplishing? There's not rapid decline in its cities and infrastructure in America, dropping bombs to spread democracy around the world, which clearly it doesn't. Create not destroy is a very powerful message that I think China is testimony to, and we should give credit to a country that can deliver this. Jamie McIntyre reporting live from Shanghai, China for News. See in the background here some buildings in the middle of Shanghai. 25 million people live in Shanghai, one of the biggest cities in the world. Now, a lot of things they're talking about in China is that CCTV footage and the surveillance. It's interesting, though, because Chinese see the surveillance of their cities and China a different way into the West. Obviously, China has a nationalist leader, a leader that's interested in the greater good of China and the Chinese citizens. And no matter what we think of their political system here in China, it's claimed to be communist, but everyone's allowed to have private ownership and a lot of the markets being free to some degree. They've been attacked in Western propaganda that they not only surveil Chinese through TikTok with spying on Americans, etc., which is a lot of it's Western propaganda. First of all, Chinese are much more into following rules. You look at the orderly society of Japan, and you look at the orderly society and success of society taking so many people out of poverty. China's been the most successful in modern history, taking so many people from poverty, a third world nation, into successful, emerging first world nation. But the way they look at this is different. This has eliminated crime. It's not done for nefarious reasons like in the West, where they want to track and trace and surveil us everywhere for nefarious globalist agenda 2030 and beyond, and digital ID and everything. It's done because it wants to reduce corruption, and they do it for the betterment of society. And Asians are much more likely to wish to follow rules. You see Japan like that, very much into following rules. So it's important for us in the West to understand that we're taught a lot of propaganda. The idea that China and TikTok was trying to spy on Americans, I often say, it's like, why would China care what Americans think? Unfortunately, because many Americans and Westerners don't think. It's not China that typically spies on foreign nations. The nation that typically spies on all other foreign nations is the nation of Israel. And that's why TikTok and American division was bought by Israel predominantly to stop free speech, not because China was spying on Americans. Australian National Review reporting here live from Shanghai, China. Jamie McIntyre reporting live here for Australian National Review in Shanghai, China. Behind me, you may not have heard Luckin Coffee before. If you haven't, you soon will. It's overtaken Starbucks as the biggest coffee chain on the planet. Has an amazing history, a fascinating story. It was originally listed on NASDAQ and was removed for a major fraud scandal. New management come in, completely changed the business model. It's basically looking at Starbucks, but they cut out all the extras, just made it simple. $2 coffee, make it cheaper, make it very simple, reduce the amount of products they have. And then they've grown rapidly ever since. They're looking at relisting on the NASDAQ. But we're talking one of the most successful, or the successful coffee chain on the planet. What is Luckin Coffee doing that Starbucks isn't? Well, Starbucks has been a great success, but Luckin Coffee's taken over. Let's check inside. And you see, it kind of does look a little bit like Starbucks, but you see, you can't see the menu here, but instead of all the different products at Starbucks, has it just shrunk it? The coffee, but coffee for a fraction of the price of what you see at Starbucks. Check out Luckin Coffee. They're coming around the world. They're opening in America as well. The biggest coffee chain on the planet right now, absolutely killing Starbucks here in Shanghai, China. Jeremy McIntyre reporting live here from Shanghai, China for Australian National Review. What you see behind me, you may not realize the skyline of Shanghai, which you may have seen before, Oriental Towers, the tallest buildings in the world, right here. But if you were to look back in the 1990s, you would have seen a very different picture. That didn't exist. Also, what you probably don't realize is this was one of the most famous ghost cities of China. But many claimed it would never fill up when they started to build this. It was one of the first most famous ghost cities, but of course we now know the city of Shanghai. That ghost city became a very successful city and it's completely full today. So there's many ghost cities throughout China, but many of them turned out to be a success. And now one of the reasons people don't realize is why China has many ghost cities is I was looking at Forest City, which is a Chinese-built city in Malaysia, just across from Singapore. And to understand why many of these ghost cities occurred, one, of course, there's multiple reasons. One, they were building cities ahead of time because they knew there's so many rural Chinese moving to cities for work. And the Chinese government could simply move a lot of government offices or factories there and fill an entire city. But because property in China is a social status, it's very similar to Australia. But in China, for men to get a wife, if they have two properties, it gives them a certain level of social status. And because there's less women than men, there's a lot of demand to try and find a wife. So by having two properties in China, gives you a certain social status. So what a lot of the developers would do, you would simply, if you bought a property in mainland China, they would give you a second apartment for free. And that's why a lot of these apartment buildings and so many of them were built, because they're basically free apartments being given to investors that had already bought a property either in mainland China or in another city. So there you have it, Australian National Review reporting live from Shanghai, a very famous former ghost city, but now is the bustling city of Shanghai, 25 million people. Jeremy McIntyre reporting live from Shanghai, China, just wandering through the parks here. Beautiful city. It's been 15 years since I was last in Shanghai. Caught the fast train then, Shanghai to Beijing, 3 hours. But it's interesting walking through the park here. We're wondering what were all these signs, etc., or posters we're seeing here. And it's interesting when we translate it, it turns out it's basically dating. Individuals putting up their phone number, details about themselves and their family, their background, looking for a potential partner. In China, there's such a shortage of women, many men unable to find a wife. And it's fascinating, despite all online type social media dating, this is China is quite common. You see around here, people wanting to find a partner. This is one of the reasons also the two countries in the world that have a massive tendency to want to buy real estate is Australia and China. They both have love affairs with real estate. But in China, it's talked about being a social status that they have at least two properties. The chances of a male having two properties attracting a partner is much greater. So property is a big social status, also the same in Australia in a different way. Australians have a love affair with real estate. Chinese also have a love affair with Australian real estate. But it's interesting. So what a lot of the big Chinese property companies did years ago, and they still do it, this is why there's many ghost cities, is they often will, if you buy a property, say, they will give a free apartment away with the property purchase. So that's why you got a lot of these, even the ghost city and forest city in Malaysia was predominantly built, this huge city, and most of it's empty still, 90% of it, because there were free apartments given to Chinese mainland buyers that bought a property in China mainland, and they're giving a free apartment. So that's also one of the reasons why you have many ghost cities in China, but many of them continue to fill up. We're in Shanghai. We're going to go shortly to, which was once a ghost city, the new Bund area where obviously the highest and tallest skyscrapers are, the famous footage you've often seen of Shanghai. That too was once a ghost city that then obviously was successful and filled up. Reporting live from Shanghai, China. Jeremy McIntyre here reporting live from Shanghai, China, here in front of a gigantic bull. Interesting, we were taught growing up that not to listen to Chinese propaganda and Russian propaganda. In the West, we have news. Now, what's interesting though is the Chinese have been used why us Westerners think our news is news, because in China they know the news isn't news, it's propaganda. but they don't understand why in the West we think our news is anything other than propaganda. And the more you start to realize the truth of news, we start to realize that actually in Western news in countries like America and Australia, it's not actually news. Mainstream media is pretty much entire propaganda. Where if you look at China Daily or Russia RT News, you start to find out when you study it, you could often say 80-90% of it is actual factual. But if you looked at Western media, could you say the same? If you come around here, you're likely to find that Western media is very different to what we'll call everything else is propaganda. Western media is more typical of this end of the bull. In other words, utter bullshit. Western media would be lucky to be accurate 5 to 10% of the time. Where RT News, as an example, we have found to be accurate 80 to 90% of the time. So most of the propaganda is ironic. In the West, we think our news is news when our news is actually absolute bullshit. There you have it, folks. Live, Shanghai, Australian National Review, ANR.news, independent media. Gary McIntyre here reporting live from Shanghai in China. You see behind me the beautiful city of Shanghai. What a miracle, really. China in the West is criticized for being communist, but I don't think it matters what type of political system. I think what matters is if you have a nationalist leader that cares for the country, a system that is focused on nationalism and focused on the people. To call China communism is really disparaging to some degree. Private ownership doesn't exist in communism, and China has private ownership. People work hard and strive. The government protects some industries and involved in many companies, etc., but so should a nationalist system have that, even in the free market. So it's not so much whether it's communism or free market that we have in the world, it's whether we have a system that is not controlled by foreign global interests. China is controlled by China, and that's why it's become so successful, whether we want to criticize it or not. But then you have, say, Australia, which could have a nationalist leader but doesn't. Where both left and right of politics is controlled by foreign globalist actors that dictate and are corrupt and steal the resources of Australia. And that's why Australia in the West has very high taxes and reducing prosperity, where China's brought more people out of poverty from a third world status than any nation in the history of modern civilization. So we should perhaps be less critical in the West, less propaganda to, and Australians should be more pro-China. Our largest trading partner, which has helped Australia become rich, but they've created this and a miracle of economy. That's certainly not perfect, but this is not communism. This is nationalism, and that's what Australia needs. Australia needs nationalist leaders, not be dictated and their resources stolen by globalist interests, not globalist interests imposing very high taxes on Australians and making Australians broke in a rich country. Australian National Review reporting live here, Shanghai, China.